You ever just look around and think, wow, there's just like so much stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you're sitting on a chair.
Right.
You've got, clothes on your back.
Yep.
You look around and there's just like gadgets and gizmos and
Things everywhere.
just stuff everywhere you look.
It's easy to take it all for granted, right?
Yeah, totally. And that's what today's deep dive is all about.
Okay.
We are going to be talking about materials and what all this stuff is made of.
Right.
So we've got this science textbook chapter here about sorting materials into groups. And I'm really kind of interested in this whole idea of like, well, what exactly is a material?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like the textbook uses all these examples of chairs and bullet carts and clothes and toys.
Right. It's like everything is made from something.
Yeah. So what is that something?
So at its core, a material is any substance that has like a specific set of properties.
Okay.
And you can use it to make something.
Okay. So it's not just about what it looks like, but also like how it behaves.
Exactly. Yeah. It's all about, how hard it is, how flexible it is, whether it conducts electricity, even its color and texture, all of that.
Gotcha. So it's about its function too, and not just its form.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to understand the properties of materials.
Okay.
Because it helps us, figure out how we can actually use them.
Right. So how do we even start to categorize this whole like universe of materials?
Yeah, it's a lot, right?
There's so much.
So many different materials.
Yeah. So the textbook mentions grouping by shape.
Okay.
Like, you put all the round things together, like balls and apples, and even, they're talking about like an earthen pitcher.
Right. You just naturally kind of want to group things.
Yeah. And I feel like we do that like without even thinking about it.
Exactly.
Like I organize my kitchen that way.
Yeah. And you can also group by the type of material itself, too.
Okay.
So think about all the things in your house that are made from plastic.
Oh, man.
Your lunchbox, maybe a bucket.
Don't even get me started on the plastic toys.
Right, exactly.
They're everywhere.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it does help. Like when you group things that way, it does help to make sense of it all.
Totally. It's all about, organization.
Yeah.
Makes things easier to find. Think about a library.
Right.
If the books weren't organized, it would be impossible to find anything.
Oh my gosh. Total chaos.
Exactly.
Yeah. A library without the Dewey Decimal System would be a nightmare.
Exactly. So grouping things helps us navigate the world.
So true. Okay. So we've got all our materials sorted now, but now the textbook goes into like the specifics of the properties.
Yes.
And this is where it starts to get really interesting.
I know.
So they talk about things like luster.
Oh, wow.
Which is like that shine that you see in metals.
Right, like gold or silver.
Yeah, like anything shiny.
Exactly.
And even metals that you don't normally think of as shiny, like iron or aluminum, they can have luster too when they're freshly cut.
It's true.
I never really thought about that. Yeah, it's because of how the light interacts with the electrons in the metal.
Oh, wow.
But that shine can fade over time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when it's exposed to air and moisture, it gets kind of dull.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, so next time you're, at a workshop or something.
Okay.
Check out like a freshly cut piece of metal and you'll see that shine.
I'm going to have to do that now. I'm really curious.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So the textbook also talks about hardness.
Okay.
And like, you could just feel the difference between holding something like a cotton ball and a piece of iron.
It's a big difference.
Yeah.
Hardness is how resistant a material is to scratching or denting.
Got it.
It has to do with like the bonds between the atoms or the molecules that make up the material.
So like at the most basic level,
right,
the atoms and molecules,
right,
that's what's determining like how hard something is.
Exactly.
Wow. This is making me think about all these everyday objects in a whole new way.
Yeah, me too.
And we haven't even gotten to all the properties yet.
I know, right?
Like the textbook talks about roughness and smoothness.
Yeah.
Like how something feels to the touch.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
We should talk about that more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to solubility.
Okay.
So the textbook uses the classic example of sugar dissolving in water.
Right.
But sand doesn't.
Classic experiment.
So why is that?
It has to do with like the forces of attraction between molecules. So water molecules are attracted to sugar molecules.
Okay.
And that attraction is strong enough to pull the sugar molecules apart.
So it's almost like a little tug of war.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
Where the water wins.
And with sand, the attraction between the sand particles is stronger than the attraction to water.
So the sand just kind of stays together.
It does.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
So it's all about the type of molecule and how they interact.
Yes.
So what about liquids? Can they dissolve too?
Definitely think about adding milk to your coffee.
Yeah.
The milk dissolves in the coffee. It creates like a homogeneous mixture.
But what about oil and water?
Yes, the classic example.
They just don't seem to mix no matter how hard you try.
You're right. Oil and water don't mix.
Like they just stay separate?
Because oil molecules are what we call nonpolar, which means they don't have charges like water molecules do.
Gotcha.
And so they just don't have that attraction.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more going on at a molecular level than we realize.
There is.
This is crazy. You know what else I thought was really cool that the textbook mentioned?
What's that?
Even gases can dissolve in water.
Yes.
Like, think about fish.
Right.
They need oxygen to breathe.
They do.
And they get it from the oxygen that's dissolved in the water.
Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, that is super cool.
All right.
So I think we've got time for one more property today.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's talk about floating and sinking.
All right.
Like, why do some things float
Yeah.
and some things sink?
So the textbook kind of hints at this concept called density without actually using the word.
Right.
But basically, objects that are less dense than water will float.
Okay.
And things that are denser will sink.
So it's not just about weight then?
No, not at all.
Like a giant log can float.
Yeah.
Even though it's much heavier than a small rock that would sink.
Exactly. It's all about how much mass is packed into a certain volume.
Gotcha.
So the log might be heavier overall, but its mass is spread out over a larger volume.
So it's like how much space something takes up.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
For its weight.
Exactly. So if an object takes up more space for its weight, then the water it displaces, it'll float.
Okay, so it's like a competition for space.
It is.
If the object wins, it floats.
You got it.
And this applies to other liquids too, right?
It does.
Like how a rubber duck would float in oil versus water?
Exactly. That's a good one to think about.
I'm going to have to try that later. That sounds like a fun experiment.
It is a fun one.
All right, so we've covered so much already today.
I know, it's a lot.
From luster to density.
All the cool properties.
It's amazing how much there is to learn about materials.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
I know. I feel like this is just the beginning
of
our journey to understanding the material world.
The key takeaway is that understanding these properties is crucial for how we interact with materials in our everyday lives.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're going to dive into in part 2
Sounds good.
of our deep dive.
I'm excited.
So make sure to tune in for that one because it's going to be good.
It is.
All right, so we just spent like the last half hour talking about, shiny metals and dissolving sugar and floating logs.
Right, all those cool properties.
And now I'm like, okay, great. I can tell the difference between, a cotton ball and a piece of iron.
Right.
But like, so why does this even matter?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one thing to classify and group things, but what's the point?
Like, what's the takeaway here?
How does it actually help us? Well, think about this. You walk into a grocery store. Right. Imagine if all the products were just randomly scattered everywhere.
Oh, my.
Cans of beans next to the shampoo bottles, bags of flour on top of the frozen pizzas.
Oh, that sounds like my kitchen counter.
Right. Complete chaos.
Yeah, exactly.
But grocery stores are organized the way they are for a reason.
Yeah.
They group all the dairy products together, the produce in another section, the cleaning supplies on a different aisle. It makes it so much easier to find what you need.
Yeah, it's true. Like, imagine if you had to, hunt for everything.
Oh, it would be a nightmare.
Yeah, you'd be wandering around the store forever.
Exactly.
So it's all about organization then.
It is. It's about grouping things by their characteristics.
Okay.
So in this case, it's by their purpose or by their type. And it brings order and efficiency.
So it's like the same principle that we apply when we organize our homes.
It is.
You put all your clothes in the closet, all the dishes in the kitchen.
Hopefully all the toys in the toy box.
Oh, yeah. That's the dream, isn't it?
It is.
So it's not just about, being tidy. It's about function.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It makes our lives easier.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense in terms of, everyday life.
Right.
But is there, a bigger picture here?
There is.
Okay.
Beyond just, the practical benefits of organization, grouping materials based on their properties also has big implications for scientific discovery.
Okay, now we're getting into the really interesting stuff.
I know.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, imagine if scientists were trying to understand how materials behave.
Okay.
But they didn't have any way to classify them.
Yeah.
It would be like trying to solve a giant jigsaw puzzle.
Oh my God.
With all the pieces mixed up and no picture to guide you.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It would be a nightmare.
Yeah.
But by grouping materials with similar properties, like those with high luster, for example, scientists can start to look for patterns.
Gotcha.
Do they all conduct electricity? Do they have similar melting points? Do they react the same way to certain chemicals?
So these groupings are like a starting point
Exactly.
for a deeper dive into the material.
Right.
A way to reveal like the hidden rules.
Yeah, the underlying principles that govern the material world.
That's so cool. Okay, so like give me an example.
Okay, so for example, scientists observed that a lot of metals share the property of luster.
Right, they're shiny.
They are.
Yeah.
And that led them to discover that the shine is related to how light interacts with electrons in those metals.
So it's not just about observing the properties.
No.
It's about using those observations to ask bigger questions.
Exactly.
And make those connections.
It's all about connections.
Okay, so this applies to all the properties we talked about.
It does.
Like density helps us understand why things float or sink.
Right.
Solubility helps us develop medicines that can dissolve in our bodies.
Or cleaning products that can remove stains.
Right, so these seemingly simple concepts actually have really big impacts on different fields.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is super cool. And, you know, it makes me realize...
What's that?
This is just the beginning.
It is.
Of like our journey to understand materials.
Yeah, and the cool thing is, this knowledge isn't just like stuck in a textbook or in a lab somewhere.
It's all around us.
It is.
Literally everything is made of materials.
Exactly.
So like now that we have this knowledge, what do we do with it?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So the next time you see an object, don't just see it for what it is. Like a chair or a pen or a water bottle.
Right.
Think about the material it's made from.
Okay.
Think about its properties.
Okay.
How hard is it? What's the texture like?
Right.
Is it transparent?
It's like looking at the world through a whole new lens.
A
material lens.
A material lens, exactly.
I love that.
So start asking yourself questions.
Okay, like what?
Why was this material chosen for this object?
Right.
What purpose does it serve?
Okay.
What other materials could have been used? And why weren't they?
That's a good one.
You'll be surprised by what you start to notice.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
So it's all about being curious.
It is.
And paying attention to the little details.
The details matter.
The details matter. That's a good takeaway.
And who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe this will inspire some future material scientists.
Ooh, I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So before we move on,
I
want to leave you with a question.
Okay, hit me.
We've talked about grouping materials based on all these different properties.
Like luster and hardness and all that.
Exactly. Yeah. But what other ways could we group the objects around us? What other criteria could we use?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah, think about it.
We could group them by their function.
Okay.
Yeah. Their origin, their environmental impact.
Interesting.
Even like their aesthetic appeal.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Like, I like how it looks.
Like the accent.
So many possibilities.
There are, and that's what makes the study of materials so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a field that's always inviting us to look closer, to question, to experiment.
Yeah.
And to discover all the amazing things about the material world.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
All right, so we've talked a lot about materials.
We have.
And their properties.
Right.
But I'm ready to get like a little bit more hands-on.
Me too. And actually, the textbook has this really cool activity.
Oh, perfect.
It says to like gather a bunch of everyday objects.
Okay.
Like a pencil, a rubber band, a hammer, even a potato.
Okay.
And try to identify the material each object is made from.
Ooh, that sounds fun. It's like a material scavenger hunt.
Right.
Okay, I like it.
Yeah, so it's a good way to start thinking about like the materials that make up our world.
Yeah, and like thinking beyond just like the object itself.
Right.
And thinking about like what it's made of, like its composition.
Exactly.
Okay.
And what you'll notice is that some objects are made from just one material.
Right.
Like a glass jar. But then other objects are made from a bunch of different materials.
Like a pencil.
Yeah, the pencil's a perfect example.
You got the wood, the graphite, and even the metal part to hold the eraser.
Exactly. And that brings us to another point.
All right.
Those materials are usually chosen for a specific purpose.
Right.
Based on their properties.
Makes sense.
Like you wouldn't use a piece of paper to build a house.
Well, you could try.
You could try, but
it wouldn't work very well.
It would not hold up.
Yeah, exactly.
You need something strong and durable, like wood or concrete.
Okay, so different materials for different jobs.
Right, and that's why it's so important to understand those properties.
Right, it helps us make those choices.
Exactly. So the textbook has another activity
Okay.
that builds on this idea. So it says to make a list of common materials,
Right.
and then try to think of all the different things you can make from that material.
Oh, okay. I try.
So for example,
Yeah.
what can you make from wood?
Oh, furniture.
Okay, good one.
Tables, chairs, beds, all that.
Yes, but also think about tools,
Oh, yeah.
toys, musical instruments,
Uh-huh.
even houses and bridges.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff.
Wood is very versatile.
Okay, what about metal?
Ooh, metal. So many things.
Yeah.
Cars, airplanes, cooking pots, jewelry.
Wow.
It's all about choosing the right type of metal
Uh-huh.
for the job.
Okay, so the same material can be used to make so many different things.
You can.
But how do we know, like, which material to use for which purpose?
Well, that's where our knowledge of material properties comes in handy.
Right, okay.
So the textbook gives an example.
Okay.
Imagine you need a container to hold hot soup.
Okay.
You wouldn't use like a thin piece of paper or fabric, right?
No, that would be a mess.
That would be a disaster.
Yeah.
So you need something that can withstand those high temperatures.
Right.
So you would use something like ceramic or metal or a heat-resistant glass.
Okay, so it really is all about picking the right material for the job.
It is.
And speaking of jobs,
Yes.
remember that challenge about floating and sinking?
Oh, yeah.
So the textbook asks you to name 5 objects that would float in water.
Right?
And 5 that would sink.
Yeah, and thinking about density can help you figure that out.
Right, exactly. And then it goes a step further.
Oh, does it?
And it's like, okay, what about if you use a different liquid?
Ooh, interesting.
Like oil.
Yeah.
Would you get the same results?
That's a good question.
So it's really encouraging you to experiment.
Yeah, to get hands-on.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I love that about this textbook.
Me too. It's not just about like reading and memorizing facts.
All right.
It's about actually going out there and experimenting.
Yeah, and testing things out and seeing what happens.
And making observations.
Yeah, it's like turning our everyday lives into a science lab.
It is.
All right, so let's recap what we learned today. So we started with this basic idea that everything around us is made from materials.
Right.
And then we talked about how those materials are grouped
Based on their properties.
based on their properties,
Yeah.
exactly like luster and hardness and solubility.
Density and transparency.
All those cool properties. And then we talked about why this grouping matters.
Yes.
Like how it helps us organize our lives.
And it helps with scientific discovery.
Exactly. And then we talked about how understanding those properties helps us make good choices.
About which materials to use for different purposes.
Yeah. I think the biggest takeaway for me, though,
Yeah.
is that this deep dive has made me look at the world in a whole new way.
Me too.
Like I'm really starting to pay attention to all the materials around me.
I think that's the goal.
Yeah,
To just be more aware of the materials that make up our world.
exactly.
Right.
So the next time you pick up a pencil or sit in a chair or sip from a glass, just take a moment to think about all the materials involved.
And all the amazing properties.
Exactly. It's really incredible when you stop and think about it.
It is. And the world of materials is full of amazing secrets.
It is just waiting to be discovered.
So keep exploring,
And keep learning.
and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Bye.